Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Dear viewers, I welcome you all on the second lecture of the Interpretation of Statute Conceptual Development. Dear viewers, my name is Dr. Ajay Sonavne, Assistant Professor, Faculty of Law, University of Delhi. Before we begin with the second lecture, let us try to understand what topics that we are going to cover in this particular lecture, and in that context, let us see first thing that we are going to understand is the nature of statute, then the types of statutes including the penal statutes, fiscal statutes, procedural statutes, beneficial social welfare statute, general and specific statute, emergency statute, substantive statute, amending statutes, codifying and consolidating statutes, delegated or subordinate statutes. And the interpretation of constitution, interpretation of contracts or deeds. So, to begin with the nature of statutes. So, in the interpretation of statutes, the word statutes or the concept of statutes definitely assumes a great importance, because this statutes is nothing but the will or edict of the legislature. So, when lawmakers, when they make the law, that again we call it as a statute or act. But while making that law, what is the different types of that statutes and how that law has been understood with some different types, that we are going to understand in this particular topic. So therefore, nature of statutes is very important to understand, because according to the nature of statutes, the things will be prepared, that is the act will be prepared, in what nature we are going to prepare that particular act. So in the pre-independence era, there was the empirical or provincial legislature who used to pass the acts, but after the independence, that is in the post-independence era, it is the acts were used to pass by central legislature or the state legislature. And also in addition to that, these two are definitely the these traditional law-making authorities. But apart from that, in the modern era, wherein also the administrative authorities are coming up with certain laws that would be also called as under the category of delegated legislation. Even they are preparing certain laws, which either in the form of rules, regulation, ordinance, bylaws, etc. So the Constitution of India is the supreme law of the land, and every act or statute has to be within the framework of the Constitution or within the boundaries that is defined by the Constitution. So the state legislature or the central legislature, whenever they are making any law, they have to prepare the law within the words of the Constitution or within the boundaries that have been set by the Constitution. Because there is one good jurist whose name is Professor Lone Fuller. So he has given a very good background about how law has to be or how law should be. So while preparing any law, what things that one should keep in mind, or what things that as a lawmaker one should keep in mind. So according to the Professor Lone Fuller, he has mentioned that law shall be sufficiently general, then law shall be sufficiently prospective in nature, it should be clear, it should be intelligible, and it should be constant through the time. So how these 5 words that are reflecting, because if you pick up any particular law, for that matter like Consumer Protection Act or Information Technology Act, this act, if you read the wordings of that act, so as the legislature they have to keep in mind the nature of act should be in such a way that it should be sufficiently general. It will not be applicable only to one person or one individual. It will be sufficiently applicable to all people in general. Then it shall be sufficiently prospective. So it will be applicable in a prospective in nature. So like in future, considering the future demands, future challenges, so law will be applicable in the future context. It should be clear. There should not be any ambiguity or vagueness or any unclear words so that even as a learner or as academician, lawyer or judge may not interpret the word. So law should be clear and law should be intelligible. So it shall achieve some objective, it shall achieve some goals, and it should be constant through time. So it shall not be in a such a way that when the lawmakers has made any law, so today they are talking about one law, they have introduced one law, and tomorrow, like after 1 week, they are again introducing the new law. So it should not be, it shall not happen in that way. So law should be constant through time, it should be in existence and constant through the time. So, and further, that when the legislatures are making the law, then what things that might be important, that needs to be taken into consideration, and that is nothing but number one, the time, the necessity, society, honest, fair and equitable, and advanced public welfare. Now what these 5 different points that are basically highlighting. So when legislature enacting a statute, it has to be in consonance with the time. So in today's era, like if we are talking about the 21st century and ahead, so any law, if it is going to be introduced, that has to achieve the goals, that has to answer the issues, that has to overcome the challenges that are presently that are existence, and some challenges that may come in future, plus the necessity that definitely if the rights of an individual has to be protected of different number of issues or for different number of matters, then those rights needs to be protected with the help of law. So again, that is a necessity. Then the society, how society is growing, because if when we talk about society, then what society we might have imagined in the year 1950, or what society which we are imagining in like after globalization or in this era. So how the society has changed. So accordingly, even law has to develop, law has to grow, and plus honest, fair and equitable. This principle shows that when the legislatures are making an attempt to make the law, there has to be very honest intention behind that. There has to be fair opportunity or fair justice, or you can say the fair goal behind enacting that particular legislation, and plus it shall achieve some equitable goals, or that has to be applicable in equitable manner to all. And definitely if the law is introduced, it shall advance the public welfare, that is welfare of all, that is because here we are talking about the social welfare era. So in the social welfare era, welfare of all is very important, and as a lawmaker they should keep these things in their mind, that social welfare goal if you want to achieve, then whenever law is going to be introduced, it shall advance that public welfare and it shall give the collective development of all. Moving ahead. So now if we are talking about this is the nature of statute, or as a lawmaker that they should keep this thing in the mind. So whenever any law is going to make on a particular subject, we have to understand now that what category of like that particular law belongs to what category. So there are number of categories which has been mentioned here. So these types of statutes, or this category of statutes that are basically used, or that are basically referred, or that can be understood, maybe of this different nomenclature, but this is not only this category, this is just for the understanding we are referring here. In future there may be some development, some new categories may arise. So first one is the penal statute, and the second one we have a fiscal statute, third one we have the procedural statute, and fourth one that is beneficial social welfare statute, then general and special statute, emergency statute, substantive statute, amending statute, codifying and consolidating statutes, and delegated or subordinate statute. So we will try to understand this now types one by one. So first one we have is the penal statutes. So penal statutes, or it can be also called as the law relating to the criminal law, because ultimately what is the primary purpose of penal statute, what is the primary purpose of this criminal law, is nothing but to punish, that is to give some punishment. So there are certain acts which is defined under the criminal law, or there are certain omissions, that is act which shall not be done, act which one should not do. So this combination, that is to perform something and the combination is not perform something, that basically gives the idea about the penal provisions by the authority of the state. And whenever we are going to interpret these penal statutes, so as a penal statute like criminal law, the primary element that we have to understand is the mens rea, that is mental element. So what was the intention of the accused person, or what was the intention of the criminal behind the committing any act or not performing any act? So that gives us the idea that intention of that accused person is very important, and therefore without mens rea it is not possible to prove that whether person has committed offense or not. So therefore penal statute or criminal statutes are basically based upon certain acts or omission, and the primary element that we have to understand here is the mens rea, that is mental element is very important. But however that mens rea may not be mandatory in every situation or every wrong which has happened. There are certain situations like strict liability rule or rules deal with the public welfare, or example that is statutes regulating the sale of food and drink. In these cases the criteria or the prime criteria of mens rea may not be relevant, may not be necessary. So in these cases the action itself or the wrong which has been committed by the person, that itself clearly shows that will impose the liability on the person to may face certain punishment or may face certain penal action. So the clear words of the act of legislature conveying a definite meaning in the ordinary sense of words used cannot be cut down or added to as to alter that meaning. So here dear viewers or listeners, that we have to keep in mind one thing is that whenever we talk about now this different category of statute, so the interpretation of that statute, like if we are talking now about penal statutes, so as a interpreter or as a learner, as a lawyer, as an academician or as a judge, we have to keep certain principle in our mind that when we are going to interpret a penal statute, then there are certain restriction, there are certain limitation that we have to keep in mind. So the clear words of act of legislature, that is first category we have to keep in mind, and conveying a definite meaning in the ordinary sense of that word that has to be used. So see the process. So it's first thing is the clear words of the act, and second conveying a definite meaning in the ordinary sense of the words. So we have to understand the words which is mentioned in the statute, and we have to convey or we have to understand that word with the definite meaning in the ordinary sense. We don't have to make something different, or we have to call out something different meaning by adding something into it or by putting some another word or another philosophy or ideology. No, we are just clearly referring the words, and we are interpreting that words and taking out the ordinary meaning from that word. So therefore alteration, addition is not allowed when we are interpreting the penal statute. Then coming to the next one, that restricted role of the court, that extend the scope of penal provisions. So the court will again apply the certain basic principle of the criminal law like mens rea or the motive, object, purpose behind committing any particular crime, but court will restrict themselves to that extent only. They will not expand the scope of the penal provision, and also cannot add or insert which is not mentioned in the act. So the scope or the limitation of that act is defined by that act itself, and court will not cross that boundary. Okay. So there is also one landmark case wherein the Supreme Court has given their observation, and especially like in the case of Sukhdev Singh versus State of Haryana, and wherein the court has observed that, if I quote, that the no law can be interpreted so as to frustrate the very basic rule of law. It is settled principle of interpretation of criminal jurisprudence that the provisions have to be strictly construed and cannot be given retrospective effect unless legislative intent and expression is clear beyond ambiguity. The amendment to criminal law would not intend that there should be undue delay in disposal of criminal trials, or there should be retrial just because the law has changed. Such an approach would be contrary to the doctrine of finality as well as avoidance of delay in conclusion of criminal trial. So, dear viewers, if you see this para very carefully, the court has basically given some restriction or limitation or some process that when you are going to interpret the penal statutes, then what can be done and what cannot be done. So, no law can be interpreted to frustrate the very basic rule of law. So, what is the basic rule of law is that we have to give the punishment to the criminals. So, that shall not affect and plus it is settled principle that the provision has to be very strictly construed and cannot be given retrospective effect. So if law is enacted, for example, like on the first day of the month, then it will be applicable from that month itself. It will not be applicable prior to that month. So therefore, that clarity should be there, that application of that law has to be in a such a manner that law shall be in prospective in nature rather than the retrospective in nature. And if it is so retrospective in nature, then law will clearly mention that the judge or even like as a lawyer, they cannot apply that law to the situation which is long back of 50 years or 100 years. So law will be prospective in nature, and the amendments whichever are made in the criminal law will not again make or will not be applicable again in the retrospective in nature. So there should be, if there is any undue delay in the disposal of matters or retrial has to be done, so that approach has to be in such a manner that it should lead to the finality and it should avoid the delay in the conclusion. Okay, so now we have a second category here, that is fiscal statutes, especially these statutes. So like here in the fiscal statutes, here what we are basically focused upon is the statutes which are related to the tax. Okay, that is a primary example in this regard. So in the interpreting of fiscal statutes, the court cannot proceed to make good the deficiencies. If there be any in the statutes, it shall interpret the statute as it stands, and in case of doubt, it shall interpret it in a manner favorable to the taxpayer. So now here again, first we saw the penal statutes. Now as in the fiscal statutes, we have to now again understand the what approach that one has to keep when they are interpreting the fiscal statutes. So here again the strict interpretation is there, but however at the same time, if the statute has to interpret as it stands, in case of doubt, it shall interpret in a manner favorable to the taxpayer. So this aspect, that wherein the taxpayer has to get certain benefit in case of if the provision is creating certain doubt, then that benefit will be given to the taxpayer. So therefore, if you see this case, that is Commissioner of Income Tax versus Orissa State Warehousing Corporation in the year 1993, wherein the Income Tax Tribunal has mentioned that the court has laid down that the good observations to understand the core principle that while interpreting a taxing statutes, equitable consideration are entirely out of place. The court must look squarely at the words of statutes and interpret them. It must interpret a taxing statutes in the light of what is clearly expressed. It cannot imply anything which is not expressed. So same like in the penal statute, as we have seen, when the court is going to interpret penal statute or fiscal statute, their approach has to be based upon, or their interpretation has to be based upon the wordings. It cannot add or no subtract or add something which is not there in the legislation. So therefore, whatever is clearly expressed, only that can be taken and accordingly that can be applied. And especially in the fiscal statutes, what things should not be done, even that can be highlighted here or even that can be understood here, because as we say, no, do's and don'ts. So what cannot be done or what should not be done, even that can be understood here. So first thing is that what restriction are imposed or what are things that as a judge should not do. That is one, to import a provision in the statute so as to supply any assumed deficiency or any additional intendment, or to presume equity about tax, or to impliedly assuming the taxpayer position. So because in the fiscal statutes, one has to remember is that every case is independent. So it is not that like one individual having certain financial background or having certain financial, no, he is generating certain revenue maybe through business or he is earning certain salary. So every individual has a different structure of paying taxes, or every individual has a different process to different process plus application of law in a different manner. So one cannot put the equality, or you can say the equal provision, equal process to all the taxpayers. So therefore, the presumption is not allowed when we apply the fiscal statutes, or presumption in the sense that if the person is earning or person is having certain good status in the society, so just based on the presumption we shall not apply the fiscal statutes. So what we have to understand is the wordings of the act is important, but at the same time the independently we have to apply those law to the independent cases. So therefore the fair towards the language that has to be used, and in case if there is a reasonable doubt, the construction most beneficial to the subject is to be adopted. But even so, the fundamental rule of construction is same for all statutes, whether fiscal or otherwise, because if the wordings are unclear in the act, if the words are unambiguous in the act, then that benefit can be given to the individual, because the law itself has certain lacuna, law itself has certain issues. So therefore in that case it is a job of the legislature to alter, modify, change that law. But if there are certain benefits that can be given to the individual just because of the unclarity, ambiguousness of the law, then that has to be given to that benefit has to be given to that individual person. So therefore it is nowadays we can also see that the court has basically now shifting their approach, because in some of the cases it has been observed that the law, if it is unclear or if it is unable to interpret, then in that case court is now shifting their approach from literal interpretation to the liberal interpretation. So they are having certain rational approach to interpret the fiscal statutes rather than strictly imposing the statute or strictly adhering to the law when it is unclear and when it is vague. So if law is vague, law is unclear, and by plain reading, by plain understanding, if nothing is coming out from it, even by applying mind is nothing come out of it, then in that case court is basically keeping the rational interpretation and giving the shift from literal interpretation to the rational interpretation. Okay. So moving ahead, now we have a third category, that is procedural statutes. And now procedural statutes are very important, because without procedural statutes we may not able to implement, or we may not able to process or understand the process of any legal proceedings. So therefore procedural statutes assumes a very significant role in to give the proper you can say steps to the other statutes. So for example, or in the words of Salmond, what he has mentioned is that the law of procedure may be defined as that branch of law which governs the process of litigation. It is the law of actions, using the term action in a wide sense to include all proceeding which is civil as well as criminal. So procedural law is basically a law which governs, or which basically inclusive of procedures, that is inclusive of civil law as well as criminal law. And like even in the Indian context, we have, like in the civil law, if we talk about, we have a civil procedure code, and that civil procedure code is basically inclusive of all the civil matters and how that civil matters can be proceeded in the civil litigation for or civil proceedings. So to understand any particular civil, or if one has to file a case for civil matters, maybe property matters or maybe other tortious matter, then one may have to follow the civil procedure code. And that process is something that every lawyer or even like litigant or any client who wants to approach to the court, they have to follow the process that is mentioned under the civil procedure code. So procedural law refers to how the court conduct legal and judicial proceedings while protecting the rights of individuals. So once suppose a case has been filed by the individual with the help of under the civil proceedings, so he will follow the first process to approach to the court, and again it is the job of court to follow the next process as per the civil procedure code, because the matter is civil proceeding matter. So ultimately the civil procedure code is not only giving the process to the lawyers or the client, but also it is the job of court to follow the civil procedure code. So it is ultimately giving the idea about the whole legal proceedings, and they do not carry any independent powers to decide any case. It is just a process. Ultimately application of mind or interpretation of laws, or putting an argument before the court, it is the job of the individuals, that is from lawyers or to the judge. And civil procedure laws or laws of civil procedure, again the criminal procedure, because the same rule or same kind of procedure will be applicable, it is available for the criminal laws as well. Okay. So now third category we have is the beneficial social welfare statute. Now this category is again very important, because this statute, which aims to confer a benefit on individuals or a class of persons, and here when we talk about the benefit of individual or class of person, that is inclusive of number of class in the you can say in the society, or in the maybe in the poor, maybe rich, or maybe having financial background, poor financial background, then for that purpose even the government or even the parliament takes certain initiative and prepare a certain statute to protect their rights. Now just to take an example here, that when the social welfare era that begins, wherein the collectivism was the approach of the state, and the reason of beginning of the social welfare era was the failure from the laissez-faire era. So in the laissez-faire era, wherein the individualism was the at the no higher level, or you can say it was followed very rapidly, so wherein it led to certain discrimination. It led to the discrimination between the rich and poor, right? And when this discrimination increased, and that discrimination increased, then that basically leads to the violation of many basic rights of the individual. To get some solution in this regard, the social welfare era that was that basically aimed for the collective development of all, and this beneficial social welfare statute are nothing but aimed towards the same thing, that talks about the collective development of all. So here, if we talk about certain legislation wherein these statutes do not focus on any one individual or growth of one individual, it basically focus upon the generals towards the person on whom benefit has been conferred, and welfare statute is an enactment which is intended to promote the welfare of society or the class of society. Here we will take certain example. So there is a act, that is Industrial Dispute Act, and this act basically enacted as a welfare legislation. So if you see here, the act is enacted as a welfare legislation, and that intends to promote what? It intends to promote the welfare of working class by ensuring to them a reasonable conditions of service, which is obligation under the constitution that is cast upon the state by Article 38 and 43 of the Constitution of India. So here if you see that the Constitution of India, which is the supreme law of the land, that has basically contains one particular part, that is part 4 of the Constitution, and that is nothing but the directive principle of state policy. So under the directive principle of state policy, if you see the certain articles, these articles are basically aims for the welfare of all people in India, and therefore every legislation or legislation like Industrial Dispute Act, which is basically aimed to promote the welfare of all, this legislation is also as an example to achieve the goals or the guidelines which is mentioned in the directive principle of state policy. So therefore, as per the urgent demands in the society, as per the urgent protecting the rights of the individual or labor workers in the society, such kind of legislation that basically helps. So therefore, even you can take the example like consumer protection laws or Juvenile Justice Act, wherein or all labor related laws. These laws are basically an example of beneficial social and welfare statute, because in the consumer protection also, wherein already there was a Sale of Goods Act, but the United Nations organization that considered that they consider that consumer rights are a human rights, and therefore if it is a human right, again the protection has to be there, or that right has to be protected in such a manner that a individual law that was enacted, and that basically giving the you can say protection to the consumers, and they are basically such that wherein even as the individual who can directly approach to the court or directly approach to the consumer commissions for the redressal of their dispute. So beneficial social welfare statute are introduced or adopted in such a nature that it can benefit the welfare of all. So moving ahead, we have this general and special statute. So here in the general and special statute, again these two words that we need to understand very carefully, because there are these two statutes. So in the general, as word suggest, general means that statute will be applicable generally, but there are certain special statute which is enacted by the parliament or state legislature for the special subject or for the special area. So for example, in that case, so if we talk about Indian Penal Code, now it is which is recently enacted, which is recently introduced by the parliament as well, and wherein which is renamed as the parliament as well recently. So here the general law in a such a way that which is applicable generally, but there are certain special laws which is enacted for the special purpose. So for example, Information Technology Act. So in the Information Technology Act, there are some procedures, there are certain rules, there are certain substantive rights that has been defined, and also certain punishment provision also has been defined. So how it is different from criminal law? So confusion may arise that we have already a general criminal law we already have, and in addition to that, now we also the Information Technology Act is specially talking about the same thing, that is punishment, process and everything. So in this case, we have to understand that the classification to be made between general and special statute with reference to the context in each case and the subject matter dealt with by the statutes. Okay, and the general statute is presumed to have only general cases in view and not the particular cases which have already been otherwise provided by the special act. And so this point is very important, that if legislature has made a special act with a particular case, then the intention of legislature has to be taken into consideration, because once the special act is enacted, then suppose for example if it is any criminal wrong that has been happened, so before enacting the special act, that criminal wrong used to govern by this criminal law. But after enacting a special act, so for example maybe this Information Technology Act, so now so that criminal wrong is now part and parcel of the Information Technology Act. It is a digital crime someone has committed, so digital crime will now be governed by the Information Technology Act, and that we have to understand, or that we have to interpret with the help of that special legislation. So if there is a tussle between the special act and general act on the same subject matter, then one has to give the priority, or one has to give the priority to the special act, and the provisions of general act to what extent should not be taken into consideration, even that will be defined by the special act itself. Okay, so if you see here that if the special act is made after general act, the position is even simpler, that having made the general act, if the legislature afterwards makes a special act in conflict with it, we must assume that legislature had in mind its own general act when it is made with special act, and made the special act which is in conflict with the general act as an exception to the general act. So in India, recently the general legislation that newly introduced, and this Indian Penal Code, or even the Indian Evidence Act or Criminal Procedure Act that has been reintroduced, or you can say that has been newly launched by the Parliament, and which is also the title has been changed, that is Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita 2023 and Bharatiya Sakshya Sanhita 2023, or the Indian Contract Act, whereas these are the like general laws we have, and there are special legislation like Information Technology Act or Life Insurance, LIC Act. Even these are the special act which will deal with only the insurance matter, that is LIC Act, or the Information Technology Act which will deal with only the digital issues or digital crimes. Now moving ahead, we have another category of statute, that is emergency statutes. So dear viewers, I think in the emergency word, if we hear, then obviously we may have come across or experience in the news or read in the news the emergency such as maybe the COVID, or emergency such as some national emergency or state emergency or financial emergency, or emergency through some disaster, maybe tsunami, etc. So for this particular purpose, even with that intention, lawmakers prepare certain laws, or lawmakers enact certain statutes, and where the provisions of such statutes are of exceptional character and meant to be in force for the specified period during which the legislature thought it is advisable and expedient to provide for the extraordinary remedies which are inroads upon the freedom action of a particular class of persons. Such provisions have to be construed strictly in accordance with the words actually used by the legislation, and they cannot be given any extended meaning. Now emergency statute, I think many of us or even the world has experienced during the COVID, that there were certain strict action that has to be taken, or government has to take certain strict decisions, and that is also according to the need of that particular time. So in the emergency situation, there may be certain rights may be curtailed, certain basic rights may not be exercised, or certain facilities that has to be provided to the individual who are more in need. So in that case, it is not unjustified, it is not something discrimination that is happening, but it is the need of time, it is the need of particular situation. So just to take an example, the act which is enacted under the category of emergency statute, such as the Epidemic Diseases Act 1897 or Disaster Management Act 2005. So the legislature enacted for the purpose of alleviating grave conditions which results from economic disaster and public calamity is deserving of generous interpretation so that its purposes may be accomplished. Because in this emergency situation, obviously the government or maybe the judges or maybe the person who is interpreting such laws has to be apply the law in a such a way that to understand the situation, the grave situation, to understand the grave consequences of that situation, accordingly they have to apply the law. Here the strict interpretation may not be possible to interpret the law in with a strict manner, but one has to be little bit generous. So even the wartime measures, if the government is taking during that era, also it has to be enacted hastily to meet a grave pressing national emergency in which very existence of state is at stake, and it should be construed more liberally in favor of the state than the peacetime legislation, because ultimately nation comes first, and when the nation comes first, then also the people who are living in that country has to contribute, has to support the state in that particular situation. So in the emergency, if one has to, state has to introduce some laws or state has to introduce certain legislation, then one has to support to that legislation. And in this scenario, it is not necessary that this law will be applicable, no, throughout, or it will be constant through time for the longer time. It may be enacted just for the temporary purpose, just for the purpose of few months, few days, like in the COVID situation, whenever the restrictions were imposed on the individual through the administrative authority or through the several legislation. It is just for the temporary period, just to once that situation resolved, when the situation turns into the normal zone, then these rules, these laws were not having that strict interpretation. Okay. Now we have another category, that is substantive statutes, and this substantive statute is again very important because generally there is a combination of this procedural statute and substantive laws. These two areas that we generally are separate from each other, but they supplementary or no, they work together. Like when we talk about this criminal laws, when we have on one side the substantive law, that is who defines the punishment, who defines the what is wrong, what is right, what about which acts are criminal in nature, which omissions are can be penalized as per the law. And on other side, the procedure, the procedural law are there, which are based upon the criminal proceedings, and therefore the procedural law are defining the procedure, and substantive laws are basically defining the rights or what are the wrongs. It defines what is the penal provision that are available against the accused person. So the statutes dealing with the substantive rights is to be interpreted in a way that substantive right available to the subject is not lost, and generally the substantive statute is treated as a prospective in nature, because again the criminal law generally we say that they are prospective in nature. So if tomorrow, if the crime has been committed if some wrong has been committed 1 year back, if it is not crime in that age or in that particular year, then if tomorrow law comes, then that person cannot be punished. So it has to be prospective in nature for the future perspective. And substantive law is concerned with the ends which administration of justice seeks, and also substantive law determines their conduct and relation in respect to the matters that are litigated. Now we have another important category, that is amending statutes. Now word amendment is nothing but that to alter, to modify, to change, or to in addition to something. So this amendment statutes is again plays a very pivotal role in the nature of statutes, because if law is enacted, for example, in the era of 18th century or 19th century, but whether that law is applicable as it is in today's context, because in the today's context the need, the necessity, or you can say the time that has changed, and even the people wants that particular law in a different shape, because the purpose and objective of that law in the era when it was enacted and the purpose of objective of the same law, keeping that same objective in mind, whether that is applicable in today's era or not. So the situation may not be the same all the time. So if the law has to be amended, then even the provision is available in the constitution or even the law in the hand of lawmakers, that they can introduce the law with certain amendments. So they can change the old law, they can change the previous old law which are already in existence, and as per the necessity, as per the time, they can introduce the new law. So the amendment, not necessarily the complete act can be amended, or it can be the whole or in part, and permitted to remain, and something is added to or taken from it. So it is the some way changed or altered to make it more complete or perfect, or to treat it better to accomplish the object or purpose which it was made, and some other object or purpose. So the alteration, modification, change is allowed, and that is for what? That is for the better implementation, that is for the better execution, that is for the betterment of people in the society. Okay, so that basically also helps the judges also to interpret that law in a such a manner, because that law is suitable in the present conditions. So amending statutes plays a very important role in this scenario, and the question may consequently arise that whether the new enactment is confined to dealing with the particular situation with which the court was concerned, or whether it goes further and covers the wider field. If so, how much wider? So answer is that there is no general rule of presumption as to this, and often Parliament or its expert advisor may take the opportunity to review the whole matter in principle and make the broad changes. Because when law is amended, so if any particular law is present in today's condition in a particular manner, and tomorrow if it is amended, tomorrow it has been introduced in a new pattern, then whether that new law will be applicable for yesterday's situation or it will be applicable for next day situation. So in that case, tussle occurs. In that case situation, court has to face some situation, and therefore it is the answer will be given by the court in a such a manner that amending statutes is generally in the prospective in nature, and if it is retrospective in nature, the legislature will clearly define that in that particular act itself. Okay, so there is an example like Direct Tax Amendment Act 1974, which was again amendment in the Direct Taxes Act, and it was obviously brought new changes. So we have a next category, that is codifying and consolidating statutes. Now what is the difference between both of them? So codifying acts are the acts passed to codify the existing law. Okay, and this is not merely to declare the law upon some particular point, but to declare in the form of code, and the hold the law upon some particular subject. So in the codification, it is the law which is passed, or the law has been codified on the existing law. So there is law is already existed. Okay, and this is not merely to declare the law, but upon some particular subject law is introduced. So the purpose of codification of the statutes is to present an orderly and authoritative statement of the leading rules of law on given subject, whether those rules are to be found in statute law or the common law. Because now when the codification is done, then they take into consideration different old laws, plus they take into consideration the laws that is declared by the judges or by the court. Considering that, law gets codified, right? And there is now another category, that is consolidating or consolidation, wherein the combination of a single measure of all the statutes relating to the given subject matter, and is distinct from the codification, in that latter systemize the case law as well as the statutes. So consolidation, so it is basically combining, it is combining all the statutes in one single measure or in one single law, like the Civil Procedure Act or Civil Procedure Code or the Limitation Act, because this Civil Procedure Code or Limitation Act is applicable to all the civil matters irrespective of what nature it is. If it is property matter, if it is matter that is related to some dispute related to some land acquisition. So this Civil Procedural Code or Limitation Act is basically consolidating all kind of factors, and accordingly that will be applicable. And also there is an example like Arbitration and Conciliation Act 1996, which is like nowadays very recent development, wherein that has been taking shape, wherein the dispute, if someone has to resolve the dispute outside the court, then Arbitration and Conciliation Act is the law which will be applicable, and even that will have, even the decision of that arbiter through that arbitration or through that conciliation, whatever decision will come, even that will have a equal respective value as the value like court's judgment, right? So there is one good observation that is mentioned by the in the codifying statutes, that is by Lord Herschel in the judgment of Bank of England versus Vagliano in the year 1891, and he has mentioned that I think the proper course is in the first instance to examine the language of a statute and to ask what is its natural meaning, uninfluenced by any consideration derived from the previous state of law, not to start with the inquiring how the law previously stood, and then assuming that it was probably intended to leave it unaltered, and to see if the words of enactment will bear an interpretation in the conformity with the view, right? So this codifying statutes is like nothing but wherein the codification is definitely done by taking into consideration previous statutes, but apart from that, the existence of the codification is nothing but very important when it comes to the interpretation of statutes. And now we have a next category, that is delegated or subordinate statutes or subordinate legislation. Now this is a category wherein these laws are not enacted by the parliament or the state legislature. These laws basically, or these rules basically enacted by the administrative authorities. So the delegated or subordinate legislation, wherein it can be also referred in the Constitution of India as a regulation, rules, orders, bylaws, minutes, schemes or other instruments. So delegated legislation or these subordinate legislations are nothing but the laws or the rules that is passed by the administrative authorities. And here to what extent they can make law, to what extent they can make the rule, that will be defined by the Parent Act. So Parent Act is basically the act which basically define the boundaries so that administrative authorities can make the law within that boundary, and administrative authority can make law only on the subject which is mentioned in the Parent Act. So the power to legislate when delegated by the parliament. Okay, so law making power has been delegated to the other authorities by the parliament. So parliament, who is the supreme authority, they are basically delegating their law making power to the other authorities, that is the administrative authorities. So here the parliament will not make the law, it is the administrative authority will make the law, but as per the limitation that is given by the parliament. So in subordinate legislation, the legislature delegates to some person or body of persons the duty of framing regulations for carrying out the policy and objects of the statutes. So here basically, if you see situation like COVID or situation like some emergency situation, wherein the parliament or state legislature, by sitting in their offices, they may not able to understand the ground reality, they may not able to understand that what is exactly need at the ground level. So therefore what they have introduced is that we will delegate this law making power to the administrative authority to some extent, wherein they can introduce that law, they can prepare the law, and they can apply that law immediately in case of such emergency, or because they are having the better understanding at the ground level. Because in the situation like COVID, or in the situation like, as I mentioned, wherein it was not possible for the parliament or for the state legislature to reach out to everyone. So it is the authorities, maybe the hospital authorities, or maybe in the education sector, the administrative authority for the education like universities, they had an opportunity, or they had given the free hand, or you can say the delegated this law making power, that you can prepare the rules according to your subject or according to your area. So if it is education like universities, they have introduced their subject, or they have introduced the pattern to conduct exam, or like in the COVID situation, the hospital, they have introduced their pattern to know how to channel their own hospital, what rules can be made. So delegated legislation is equally important, that even the court should make a cautious approach in interpreting the subordinate legislation and adopt almost the same standard as adhered to the interpreting the legislative enactments, because court cannot say that it is the law that is made by the administrative authority, therefore they are less important, or they do not have that much importance. But however, we have to remember that when the administrative authority is making the law, so this power has been given to them by the parliament itself. So it is the legislature or the traditional legislature has given this power of law making to the modern legislative authority, that is nothing but the administrative authority. So the subordinate legislation must be a reasonable and in consonance with the legislative policy, and also give effect to the purpose and object of the act and in the good faith. Because subordinate legislation, like if the administrative authority, when they are getting this power to make the law, so they shall use that power very cautiously, very carefully. They cannot misuse that power, or they cannot introduce the law in such a manner that can be go beyond the constitution, or that can go beyond the parent statutes. So therefore, what is the job of court in this regard when they are interpreting the delegated legislation? Then here it is mentioned that when a court is required to determine whether a piece of delegated legislation is bad on the ground of arbitrary or excessive delegation, the court must bear in mind the following well settled principle. Okay, so first principle here is that the essential legislative function consists of determination of legislative policy and its formulation as a binding rule of conduct, and this cannot be delegated by the legislature. So basically, the parliament or the state legislature, both are such body who are basically owns this law making authority. So they cannot transfer everything to the administrative authority. There are certain limitations. So therefore, word has been used here, the essential legislative function, which consists of determination of the legislative policy and its formulation. This cannot be transferred to the administrative authority. Rest they can transfer some ancillary function or some assistance as an assistance. They can transfer this power to the administrative authority. Plus, the legislature must retain in its own hands the essential legislative functions, and what can be delegated is the task of subordinate legislation for the basically implementing purpose and the objects of that particular act. Right? Moving ahead, where the legislative policy is initiated with sufficient clearness or a standard is laid down, the court should not interfere, because once the parliament or state legislature sufficiently defines for what purpose, for what policy, or what is the object behind delegating this power to the administrative authority, then in that case court should not interfere into it, that why this power has been delegated. It is the job of, it is the discussion between parliament and the administrative authority, which is the allowed by the constitution itself. Then what guidance should be given, and to what extent, whether guidance has been given in a particular case at all, depends on the consideration of provisions of a particular act with which court has to deal, including its preamble. Because when the law making authority is delegated to the administrative authority, then what is the purpose, object, or idea behind that? Everything has to be made sure that it depends upon the consideration which is mentioned in the act itself. So at the beginning, the preamble itself gives us the idea that why this law making authority has been transferred to the administrative authority. So the nature of body to which delegation is made is also a guidance in the matter of delegation, and to what form the guidance should be take will depend upon the circumstances of each statutes under consideration and cannot be stated in general terms. In some cases, guidance in broad general terms may be enough. In other cases, more detailed guidance may be necessary. Okay. So this is about the delegated legislation. Now the next, which is very important, and that is something which is not the type of statutes, but this is something, the supreme law of the land, and that is nothing but the Constitution of India. So the interpretation of the Constitution is again very big task, and also it is something that the document is enacted or prepared by the lawmakers of the Indian Constitution in such a way that that document holds the importance and it holds the identity, such as it is the living organic document or organic living document, which can be interpreted according to the time, according to the changes in the time, according to the changes in the society. So with regard to the constitutional interpretation, the judge must decide among other things and how much weight to give arguments about the plain meaning of the constitution text or the text purpose or spirit, and historical evidence concerning the intent of the framers. and the judicial interpretation of constitution shall be capable of growth and development over a time to meet new social, political and historical realities often unimagined by its framers. And that is what the beauty of the constitution, because however constitution might have been enacted in 1950s or that has been introduced, but even in the today's era that constitution has the power or has that credibility or has that capacity to interpret in even the today's era with the same provision, with the same wordings of the provision, and that is what it makes it very different. So article 13 of the constitution that defines what is law, and all the restrictions or the rules, regulation that has to be within the purview of article 13 of the constitution. So if there is any law which is inconsistent with the article 13, then that law will be declared as the invalid by the court. So therefore this is obviously very fundamental canon of the interpretation, that constitution should receive a literal interpretation, liberal interpretation in favor of the citizens, and especially in respect to the safeguard of liberty and security of the citizens. Now there is a last category we have here, that is interpretation of contract or deeds. So basically contract or deeds are such a document which is basically are between two individuals or parties wherein they are agree on something, and that is printed into a particular document. So they put their conditions, all clauses in that particular document. So the contract being the creature of agreement, so two or more parties that come together and prepare that document and agree upon something, and that is basically inserted in the clauses. So literal meaning has to be given to it definitely, but unless if there is some ambiguity, the document itself will be considered as the valid proof for the same. So therefore in the case like Bharat Builders Private Limited versus Parijat Flat Owners Cooperative Housing Society, wherein the dispute was involved between the promoter and purchaser, and there was a debate between them was whether this document was of sale or of lease. So the court here simply stated that the document was to be construed as per the wording of that document, and if the language is unambiguous, then document will be the source to understand and the law associated with that. Okay. So in conclusion, I would like to conclude by stating that what we have learned from this particular topic, that is number one, nature of statutes, and in the type of statutes, what is basically outcome of every type of statutes. Like if it is a penal statutes or fiscal statutes, there has to be a strict in interpretation. Procedural statutes, it basically gives the idea about the entire legal process, either it is civil or criminal. If it is beneficial or social welfare statutes, it is the collectivism that basically prime in focus. If it is general and special statutes, there are some objectives that we are trying to achieve if it is special by special statutes. If it is emergency statutes, then necessity was there and therefore statute was introduced. If it is substantive statutes, it defines the acts on again not to what not to do. If it is amending statutes, then the change has to be brought with the help of amending statutes. Then there is a codifying and consolidating statutes and the delegated or subordinate statutes that basically transfer the law making power to the administrative authority. And the interpretation of constitution is basically the supreme law, so we have to adhere to that in every manner, and the contract and deeds will be with the help of words of document. So dear viewers, with this we are basically trying to understand the nature of statutes in this with the help of different category, and this concept of interpretation of statutes will develop with this different nature of statutes. So with this I conclude my lecture, and thank you listeners for listening to this particular lecture. Thank you.